Welcome, fellow wine lovers. This is the Wine Ghost podcast. I'm Mate Bosch, a certified sommelier and seeker of hidden stories behind the most mysterious drink in history. For more information or direct contact, please look for the Wine Ghost on Instagram and Facebook. But now, please grab a glass, get comfortable, and listen to how the day's ghosts get out of the bottle. In this episode, you can hear a particularly inspiring conversation with Heidi Mäkinen, Master of Wine from Finland. In addition to earning her MW title in 2019, she is also the president of the Finnish Sommelier Association, working as a wine ambassador and educates students and wine enthusiasts all over the world. During our conversation, Heidi shared her former experiences working as a female sommelier in the UK and what kept her going to pursue one of the most difficult exams in the world. She shared her approach to learning about wine and tips to nail a wine in a blind tasting more easily. But you can also hear her book recommendations, introduction to the Finnish wine culture, thoughts about fruit wines and much more. To show how much this episode goes beyond the topic of wine, I'd like to share Heidi's motivating advice. Quote, "If you listen to that inner voice, that inner truth, if you work hard, if you are honest to yourself about the work you've done, then that's the best advice that I could give," unquote. But now, please just relax, grab your glass and listen to Heidi. So, thank you, Heidi. Welcome to the show. Thank you for taking time. How are you today?
Thank you for having me, Mate. I'm good. I just finished working. I'm currently working from home, but I'm being quite rigorous and we have a lot to do in the company. So been working quite intensely for the last 8-9 hours.
Busy times, I guess. And what kind of works can you do now, or do you do these days?
Well, obviously, because of the pandemic, the restaurant trade is pretty much down to zero because there's no restaurants that are allowed to be open. And in Finland, because we have the retail monopoly for alcoholic beverages above 5.5%, restaurants can't really sell out wine either. This is why we are concentrating most of our efforts into the alcohol sales and trying to get consumers to go and buy our wines from alcohol. But we are also cooperating with our restaurant customers, and a lot of them are doing now takeaways and different kind of home delivery food packages. And we've made flyers and supporting programs so that people could go and buy wines to go with those meals to make their meals at home as reminiscent of having a meal in the restaurant as possible in this time.
And in terms of, or just in comparison with your previous tasks, how did it change, or what changed really?
Well, mainly I still do a lot of content for the company. So my title is wine ambassador. And I do on-trained wine education. I create events with the producers that we have in our portfolio. I create a lot of content with those producers, whether it's for our website or for our customers and so forth. And currently, I'm still doing some of that content, but of course, there's not much on-trade wine education or customer visits to the restaurants that we can now do. But we have come up with a lot of new ideas, and we, for example, launched our Facebook Live talks, which is like a conversation program with different visitors every time, where we talk about everything wine and a bit beyond. So I've always done a lot of multiple things in my job, and now it's just kind of different kind of multiple things that I do.
Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, you are doing a lot of Facebook Live tasting. How these tastings are turning out for you? How do you like this approach?
I really like it. I think it's going to be a new thing for everybody in most industries. After the pandemic, we are now realizing, and we're being forced to use, social media and digital technology to make our businesses work. And I think after the pandemic, these will become normal tools for everyday work life. I've really enjoyed doing the videos and interacting with people behind the scene and also, or behind the screen actually, and also it's nice that even if you can't attend the live meeting at that time, for example, Facebook is recording and keeping all those videos there in the archive, so people can go and watch them later on. And we've had a great publicity and great response to those videos we've made.
So do you think these changes, this will be the major or main part of the industry now?
Well, I think we should use the new situation in a positive way and try to figure out what are those tools that we can still carry on using. And now it's a time to kind of experience many things, and then afterward we can all look back and realize which were the good parts and which were not the good parts, and then we can blend these new ideas into the tools that we had before this all started. So I think we should use it as an opportunity to make real changes and beneficial innovations, making them real.
And just as you also mentioned that you are a wine ambassador, maybe listeners or not all listeners know what a wine ambassador is. How would you maybe explain it?
Well, I guess in every company, wine ambassador has different things. So, as I say, my main job is to do on-trade wine education and do a lot of portfolio management as well. I work closely with our producers. I try to look at the opportunities and changes we could do in our portfolio. I create content in regards to events where we have producers visiting us. We've launched and trademarked a concept called Viinity and Wine Talk, where we have industry people coming in to talk on a topic in an insightful way. We often taste wine together as well, and we're trying to create a platform for conversation and to learn new things about wine ourselves as well. So my job is wine ambassador. I guess is just because it's a broad name, and it will force people to ask me what do I actually do for my living, and it kind of gathers in everything that I just do regarding wine. Well,
after all what you said, I think I should mention that you became a Master of Wine last year, and my congratulations for this title. And you are one of the few Master of Wines who are actually women. In general, it's kind of a male-dominated scene, the wine scene, or have been at least. How do you see your role now, or maybe as a Master of Wine, what changed for you, and maybe as a female Master of Wine, what?
Well, my background is being a sommelier in a restaurant, and when I used to work in restaurants in Finland, I never realized the question when people were asking me about the difference between being a female and being a male in the industry, because Finland is such an equal country. But then I did work in London for almost 2 years, and there I realized it definitely is a male-dominated industry. It's increasingly becoming younger and it's increasingly becoming more equal, but I did have a few occasions where I kind of had to prove my knowledge to some even customers, because I was a young female and not a native English speaker as well. Obviously, becoming a Master of Wine when that time I was still 31 and female, that was definitely something that I would like to use as an encouragement for other young, especially female wine professionals out there, that you can realize your dream regardless of your gender and of your age. Overall, I'm not super interested in anybody's gender or age in whatever I do, but I do like to be encouraging those people who feel that they are being judged because of who they are and how they were born. But in Finland, it's definitely not a big difference, and it's not something that people bring out that much. But I also did see when I used to compete in sommelier exams and sommelier competitions. And I remember when we were in Argentina in 2016, competing for the World Championships, there were only 4 female sommeliers attending the competition, and we all got through into the semi-finals. So that was quite interesting to see. Out of 60 people, only 4 women, if I remember correctly. So in some certain circumstances, it does still feel that the industry is quite male dominated. But to my personal liking, it's a bit more equal where I work.
Mm. And how did you start maybe in this industry? I think when you started, it was, as you mentioned, was even more male dominated. So how did you start in this profession as a sommelier, especially?
Well, I guess most people who end up to in the restaurant trade do exactly that. So they end up there. My journey in the hospitality industry started when I was 18, and I moved to UK when I was just finishing high school before I started university. And I ended up working in a small family-owned business where we had 10 rooms and an inn. So there was a breakfast, lunch, and dinner served both to the customers of the hotel, but also to the local people in the Cotswolds area. And I really enjoyed the whole hospitality industry and serving other people. Kind of got interested in food, not so much about wine yet, but I was really into that kind of atmosphere that the restaurant had, the buzzing atmosphere. And when I returned back home to start my university studies, I got myself an evening job, and I quite quickly got a position in a high-end restaurant where we were working in fine dining. We were working with great wine, and I realized I didn't know much about the product. I could learn the dishes and learn the ingredients, where the dishes, where, for example, the reindeer meat came from. But I didn't know anything about the wine that was being poured into the glass. So I started asking questions from a sommelier who used to work there with me. And at some point, I realized when I went to the library, I didn't bring home books that were related to my university studies, but books that were related to wine. And I started learning little by little about wine, and that got me really excited. And after 3 years, I decided that I'm gonna finish my university studies after the bachelor's degree and then fully focus in restaurants and wine. And that's what I've done ever since.
And where was maybe the transition from being a sommelier to being a master of wine? Because you started as a sommelier, so you could maybe go for the master sommelier.
Well, what's always been interesting in me, well, what I started to study wine in the first place and what I carried on was that there was so many questions that I didn't know the answers to. So I all the time wanted to learn more about the wine and understand wine more thoroughly. And working in restaurants, serving wine, also doing those sommelier competitions, they were the ways for me to teach myself and push myself further and to study more. But I did my WSET level 3 after my initial sommelier education here in Finland. And after the level 3, I decided that I wanted to learn a bit more. I also did a bartending course, but I really wanted to learn more about wine. So I enrolled to the diploma level, so level 4 in WSET. And there I had a few masters of wine teaching me. And I had always thought that the MW program is incredibly difficult and incredibly expensive, but they can told me that yes, it's quite expensive, but it's but not that expensive as I thought, yet that it would be incredibly difficult. And that time as well, I was doing the sommelier competitions, and that way of studying was more about really memorizing things for me, rather than fully understanding everything behind the wine. When I had a glass of wine in my hand, I could maybe understand that particular wine and describe it, but I didn't understand why that wine was like it was. So after doing the diploma, I decided that, okay, I think my path would be to do the MW rather than the MS, because I already had that kind of educational experience from those sommelier competitions, which I think is quite close to the MS style of study.
And did you want to stay in restaurants or in hospitality, or was it also the reason behind maybe the choice that you wanted to get out of the industry and you wanted to do more research maybe and more?
I never thought, well, I never think about my career path as such. I never think about what do I want to do in 3 years time or 5 years time or 10 years time. But I always thought that I would want to work in restaurants because I really loved the buzz of working in a restaurant. So when in 2016 I decided that I'm going to move to London, I moved there for 2 reasons. First of all, it was to support my studies. to be able to study together with other people, to be able to join a lot of trade tastings and be just accessible to the wines of the world. But my other reason to move there was to be able to work in a really high-end restaurant and busy restaurant and really push myself in the hospitality industry as well. And I luckily got a job at 67 Pall Mall, which was a great experience on that front. However, when I was at 67 Pall Mall, I was starting to think about my next step, just for the not a long-term career plan, but just like where would I work after that. And I got approached by the company that I now work for, Vinitier, which is a wine importing company. And I had never thought about myself as a somebody who would work for wine importing companies, because I always thought the only job would be to sell wine, and I don't really see myself as a salesperson, even if that's a very important part of being a sommelier. But the job that they suggested me, this wine ambassador job, sounded very interesting. And that time there was really a lot about wine education. It's just become something, a mix of things, like I said earlier. So I started to think, okay, so if I would go to another restaurant after 67 Pall Mall, what could I learn from that restaurant? What that restaurant could provide me with to my endless thirst in learning and understanding more things. And I thought, actually, at this point, I think the wine importing business might offer me more understanding in the whole industry, as my previous background was only in restaurants. So I never kind of planned to step out from hospitality, but I'm very glad that I did, because now I feel like I understand the whole distribution line and everything more thoroughly, being worked both in the hospitality with end consumers and now more in a kind of business to business environment.
Mm-hmm. And you also mentioned that Master of Wine Studies, these are quite hard and quite expensive. And so what did really motivate you to be on this path of excellence, to become one of the best of the world in this trade and to achieve this goal? So what was maybe your deepest desire? That's why I asked, because I also asked you about gender differences, or that was maybe one of the motivations that maybe prove even more that you are a female, you are young, you come from Finland, and you want to become an expert, one of the best in the world? Or was it more that you wanted to get out of the restaurant industry? Or what were maybe your biggest motivations in the darkest hours, so to say, when you had to study more and more and prepare for the exams?
Well, if I'm totally honest with you, my biggest driving force in all of this has been my curiosity. I only do things, and I try to only do things in life that I do for myself. So I would never do things really for publicity or honor or awards or money. Those things don't drive me to go forward. It's my curiosity and my motivation to become better as a person and better in what I do. So yeah, I don't have anything to prove to anybody else apart from myself. And yeah, it's just been a way for me to really have those answers when the glass of wine is in front of me, and knowing more about it, understanding it more thoroughly. And I still don't have all the answers, and I think that's very important as well, to be able to realize that, and to be able to say to yourself and to other people as well that there are lots of things that you don't understand, a lot of things that you do not know. So no, I've never done the any education that I've done. I've never done it to be able to get somewhere or get an access or like you said, get away from hospitality industry or something else. It's never like that. It's just for my own personal curiosity and drive to become better as myself.
Mm-hmm. So really intrinsic motivations and really curiosity.
Yeah, I would say so.
Mm-hmm. I think that's that's a big learning, because I think a lot of people should, or at one point in their profession, they think about being the best, but if they don't find the intrinsic motivation, the extrinsic could go away very quickly, maybe. And so what would maybe your advice be for students or for people for the darkest hours? What would maybe your preparation tips or tips for finishing this hard road?
I think the most important thing is to be truthful to yourself. That's my kind of motto in life. And if you are fully all the time truthful to yourself, so you're not trying to, hide yourself about the real reasons why you're doing certain things, for example, then you also know if you actually done the work to get there, if you're doing it for the right reasons. You can't, you can always go to somebody else and said, you've studied so much, why you should win this, or you should really get this. But inside of you, you should really know if you have, and if you listen to that inner voice and that inner truth, then I think that's one of the biggest, guidance that I can give. So, for example, when I sat the stage 2 exams of the Master of Wine program, of course I didn't know if I had passed, but I knew that I had done my utmost in those exams, and if I didn't pass, then I would just need to work harder and harder. But at that point, when I sat those 4 days, when I sat those exams, I felt that I had given my absolute everything. I had done my absolute everything in terms of preparation, being motivated, getting myself up to the hopefully up to the standard that was required. So if you do that, and if you work hard and you are honest to yourself about the work you've done and all the effort that you've put through, then I think that's the best guidance I can give.
And you mentioned that you are also an educator, right? And so what is maybe your way of combining information into a whole? I think about, for example, maps, tasting notes, and I don't know, stories about the region. So how would you put it all together? Do you have a particular method or way of thinking how you put all this information together?
Well, I think it's most important to understand the big holistic picture. So, for example, if you start looking at a certain region, you need to place that region on the map. You need to look at the geography. You need to look at the climate. You need to look at the cultural and historical background of that region. Then you come into the grape varieties, why those grape varieties ended up being there, what affects the way those grape varieties grow there, regarding climates or geography and topography, for example. What are the stylistic cultural decisions people have been making in that region? And then when you have this kind of big picture in mind and you look at the map, you start understanding that wine is combining all those things in life, whether it's got to do with nature or culture or history or people. And you need to understand the whole picture, and then you can go back into the detail about the wine. But if you don't understand the big picture, then it's just going to be separate minor details that you might be able to memorize, but you don't link together, and then you don't have the big picture understanding. So of course it depends what you're studying for. If you are studying for competitions, then you need to really have great memory and do a lot of revision on certain things. And when I used to compete, I had all these lists that I would go through and through and through all the time, and always mark it whether I remembered it or not, and then carried on only reading those things that I struggled to remember. But if you want to understand the bigger picture that WSET or the MW program asks you to, then that kind of studying is much more thorough, in that sense that you need to have look at the subjects from different viewpoints, from positives and from negatives, from pros and cons. So then you need to also be critical and analyze things rather than just memorize the facts.
And about blind tasting, because tasting is a very big chunk of a sommelier curriculum, or even the WSET curriculum. Which tips would you give, or which tips do you give for your students to improve their blind tasting skills?
Well, first of all, they need to taste a lot, and not just taste wines that they like drinking, but to go into trade tastings and taste the wines that are, for example, not relevant to their work. So when I started thoroughly studying about wine, I was working in a restaurant where we only used European wines. But when I went to trade tastings, that was my only chance to really get to taste wines from, for example, South America or South Africa or Australia. So at that time, I was not in my job. I was not interested in those wines because they had no relevance to our customers in the restaurant. But I had to taste through those wines to really understand the styles. So first of all, you need to have a lot of tasting experience and push yourself also to taste a lot so that your palate can do, several tens of wines a day. But then also when you do blind tasting, you need to focus. You need to think about the wine, not just the aromas and flavors, which are often, to my liking, discussed way too much, but you need to think how the wine feels, for example, in your mouth. What's the texture? What's the structure? That's a lot more important and interesting. And that's also the key to understanding what the actual wine is. To nail the wine, it comes from the structure rather than the aromas and flavors. In my, at least how I see it. And then also to be logical. So you need to have that theory background knowledge that you can link the wine logically to a certain place or a certain variety. And often to also remember that in blind tastings, for sure, there's somebody in the world, always somebody in the world who makes a crazy grape variety in a crazy location. But how likely is that particular wine is going to end up in that blind tasting that you are doing? So I think it's important as well to kind of stick to the classics and learn the classics first, and then start thinking about outside the box. But to be logical, if it tastes like Riesling and it tastes like Alsace, then it's Riesling from Alsace. So, but you need to know what Riesling from Alsace is like if you want to do that. So you need that knowledge, but then also the logical argumentation to get to the right answer.
Do you have any specific techniques how you write your tasting notes or how you organize them?
I started, in the competitions, for example, the tasting notes are they kind of follow the Master Sommelier program style. But when I went and then you have WSET style, which I kind of never really liked, but I just follow the rules as you do when you're trying to get a certain qualification done. But when I went into the MW program, I changed my approach completely. So I started using something called the cross, where different parts of the cross would have different meanings. So that would save me time from writing, for example, words like acidity or tannin or alcohol, because I would just write the adjective. So for example, precise or meaning acidity, or granular meaning tanning in that part of the cross. So I would save time. It's also because in the MW program and in the exams, your time is very limited. So you want to spend maximum of like 2-3 minutes in tasting the wine so that you can spend most time writing the actual answer. So when I was doing the program, I started doing this kind of wine notes. But afterwards, now I've gone back to kind of my personal wine notes. I do still write notes quite often, mostly when I go to trade tastings, but they tend to be very short. They tend to be about my personal preference in those wines and not just objectively writing those notes, because I'm just writing the notes for myself mainly. So they tend to be just maybe 5 words maximum, and then I might mark a plus if I really like the wine. I don't use any numerical scores to the wines, but now it's just for my kind of own pleasure. I try to remember what the wines were like. So I'm not writing tasting notes for anybody else, and I'm not publishing my tasting notes anywhere now. So it doesn't really matter how I write them. It's just for my personal use.
And if you would maybe scroll through your tasting notes, what do you think would maybe the feature what differentiates a good wine from maybe a less preferred wines in your notes?
Well, it depends if I just write about my objectively looking at the wine. So if I'm objectively trying to say what's the quality level, I look at the balance in wine. I look at the length of the wine. To me, you know, it's not that, you know, wine that's super concentrated is going to be, you know, signing that it's signaling that it's a great quality wine. Also, sometimes, you know, kind of little wines and shy wines can be great quality. But I look at the potential, which is normally shown in the development in the glass and also in the length of the wine. But for my personal liking, I really enjoy wines with freshness, whether that freshness comes from the acidity or the texture or the freshness of the fruit on the palate. Those are the wines that usually get most plus marks in my tasting notes from myself.
If you talk about freshness, yeah, maybe it's a big jump, but what's your approach about natural wines? Because I I usually find these words that fresh or alive in my tasting notes when I write about natural wines.
Well, usually, I mean, the most successful natural wines tend to come from regions where it's relatively cool climate, or at least climate with like a moderating influence, like altitude or closeness to a sea or ocean, and where the pH levels as well of the wines can be a bit lower, so that you don't need to add so much sulfur, and you can kind of make safe wine with rigorous cleanliness in the winery and so forth. Those wines tend to also often have quite high acidity, and often those wines also have elevated level of volatile acidity, which can add a bit of freshness to the wine. And of course, often the natural wine styles tend to be less extracted, meaning that there's less tannin also in the wine, and then it tends to be rather fruity, easygoing. So yes, I could agree that most of them have that freshness that I look after in wines, but I don't. But I also like wines that really have, you know, more than just one story to tell. And quite often, I find in the natural wine bars that I go to, that I find the wine selection that they're serving, you know, kind of interesting. And the wine in my glass can be very easy to drink and kind of glue wine. But whether that wine really leaves a mark in me, and whether that wine is something that I would want to tell to other people or buy into my cellar to keep for a few years, often those wines tend to be what I use the term is called little wine. It's nice to drink, a glass or two, but it's not something that I would, you know, want to really cellar and look how it evolves in many years' time. But I think that's the whole point of a lot of natural wine. They are meant to be easy drinking, enjoyable, fresh, refreshing the food that you're having, and trying to make wine easy to approach and not being something that a lot of people look at. You know, how some people look at wine is like it's a bit snobbish and it's only, you know, like for elder men, for example. So I think natural wine has brought a lot of conversation to the wine world and a lot of diversity to the wine world, and also because of the new consumer group that it has brought to the wine world. Also, the kind of so-called conventional wineries have needed to adjust their ways of making the wines regarding, you know, treatments in the vineyards or sulfur levels used in the wines, but also thinking about their approach, how they want to attract these consumers that might be new to wine and might be having their first experiences in wine through natural wine, which is of course a great thing for the whole industry, that we get new people coming into the wine world, for example from the spirit industry, leaving the hard spirits aside, or just enjoying them more responsibly in cocktails and so on. So yes, so when I taste wine, I want the wine to be, you know, tasty, and I want the wine to be well made and clean, and after that comes whether it's natural or not.
I don't really want to use the term trend, because natural wine is not really a new trend, because I think a lot of old and very prestigious winemakers used to do wine like that. If you, for example, think DRC, for example, or Le Puy in Bordeaux, they worked biodynamically and made natural wine, basically, if maybe not the strictest term, but they use this kind of approach. So do you think that these methods, maybe they have a better future?
Well, I think a lot of people are going back to handcrafted traditional methods, artisanal things, whether it's how you make bags and shoes, or whether it's how you grow your vegetables, or how you make your wine. So there is a trend towards pure handwork methods, and I think that's also shown in wine, and I think it's a good thing. There was of course technological innovations that they help us, and especially at times like this when we are all stuck into our homes, we are dependent on technology and being able to connect with the world through whether it's videos or internet phone calls or so forth. But also we have appreciation and respect for those old traditional methods that our grandparents and great grandparents were using in their farming and in their everyday life, and going back to those methods and realizing and understanding the value of those methods, it's a great thing. But I think we can also not to forget all the new innovations. So the perfect situation would be to combine both and to look into where we can benefit from the learnings from the past, and where we can actually benefit from the learnings from the future and current day life.
Why is it important for certain consumers, or maybe then even buyers, to have the biodynamic label and certificate? Maybe it sounds like a stupid question, but if I talk to a lot of guests, or even to my friends, they don't really know what this certification means. They just have something in their head that it's better, but they cannot really justify it.
Well, first of all, having a certificate, it is the proof that you actually are doing what you say you're doing. There are a lot of producers who are practicing organic methods or biodynamic methods, but when times get really bad, for example, when there's a lot of disease pressure, and if they're not certified, most of them would probably spray so that they can avoid losing their whole crop. I think one of the most famous examples of this is Château Pontet-Canet in Bordeaux, in Pauillac, where in I think it was 2008 or something around that, they decided to spray again, and then they had to start the whole process of becoming organic and biodynamic all over. And Alfred Tesseron has said that he's really sorry that he made that decision, but he felt like at that point he felt that was the only option for him to do. Now he would do it differently, but it's a big risk to get involved with these certifications. But it is a proof, not just for the producers themselves, but also for the consumers, that they are doing what they say they're doing. Of course, certifications have, their limitations and their restrictions, and they cost the money and so on. So they're not for everybody. But I think in terms of consumer understanding and knowledge about those certifications, that's where we need wine education. We need to teach the consumers what are those little back labels on bottles, or in food products as well. What does it actually mean when a wine is organic or biodynamic? And also because in different countries it means different things, and in different certification it means different things. But overall, I think the certifications are a good way to show a bit more transparency in how the products are brought to life. What are the methods in farming and producing them? So I think overall it is meaningful, but it just needs to be educated a bit more.
Yeah, I think so too. And when I did the podcast with one of my guests last year, he's a biodynamic farmer in Hungary, and he also makes natural wines. And after this podcast, I got a lot of requests because they wanted to drink or buy a lot of biodynamic and natural wines. But when I asked why, or how did they perceive these products, why are they biodynamic, their first thought was because it's healthier. And a lot of people had this response. Do you find this approach common also in your trade or in your experience, or this is maybe the one characteristic what they are looking for in these kind of wines?
Well, I guess it's one of those things that when you don't know so much about a product, and you have the chance to choose organic, for example, versus non-organic, you tend to think that that's also because of the quality. So, for example, I don't know enough about growing certain fruits, but when I go to the shop, I have like that preconception in my mind that if I buy organic apples or organic lemons, well, of course, there's going to be less herbicides or pesticides or fungicides that they have to use in growing those. But also, I do tend to think that it's a sign of quality, because those producers, they definitely have to work more in their farm to create those products and make them healthy. So I tend to think that it's also shown in the quality of the products, even if I don't know, it's a preconception that I might have. Health-wise, for sure, less. I like purity in fruit and food and wine and whatever I do. I like purity. So when you know that something's grown organically, you know that there's going to be less harmful ingredients used to get that product in front of you. So I guess in that sense, people are thinking that it's healthier. For sure, mostly organic and biodynamic production, it's what happens in the vineyard. There are restrictions in the winery, especially, with sulfur dioxide, but sulfur dioxide is not unhealthy. So it might be a bit of a misconception amongst certain consumers that those products are healthier, but at least they are made in a more pure way in terms of stuff used in the vineyards and stuff spread on the grapes and other fruit.
And we already touched maybe a little bit on Finland, or I mentioned that you come from Finland. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about the wine culture now in Finland, and how should we imagine your trade there in Finland or in Helsinki?
Well, you mentioned earlier that coming from a country that doesn't have wine production, a lot of people have asked me that question during my years in this industry. I think because we don't have wine culture per se. We haven't been growing vines in our backyard in a similar way than Spaniards and Italians and French people have. So we don't have that inner wine culture within us. But that's also an opportunity for us to be open towards the whole wine world. We don't have certain built-in preconceptions that certain wines and certain regions are better than the others. So we are very open-minded when we approach the wine world. Of course, here as well, there are trends that come and go. And, currently there's a big rosé wine trend here as well in Finland as in elsewhere in the world. And also, these natural wines and organic and biodynamic wines are trending amongst at least kind of younger consumers. So I think it's also it's a hindrance in a way that our our consumption is mainly on beer. About almost 50% of alcoholic consumption in Finland is on beer. It's a hindrance for wine, but the share of wine is all the time growing, and the share of spirits is all the time going down. So it's a sign of Finland also becoming a bit more European in their culture. And a lot of people are now very interested in combining wine and food, so they're really understanding that wine is to be drank amongst dinners and lunches, and it's a product to be enjoyed with a full meal, and not just on its own, even if that's of course still allowed. But it's becoming more European as a country, and also that's shown in the wine and food culture that we have here now.
And how do you see the rule of wine maybe in everyday life, not just in Finland, but this question came to my mind. If you talk about between different courses on a dinner or on a dinner table, where do you see the role of wine maybe in a culture or in a family or in everyday life?
Well, of course, I'm not born, but I'm kind of raised in this industry. So I was, to me, wine is part of my everyday. It is very rare still in Finland to have wine for lunch. A lot of people kind of look quite for a long time if you order a glass of wine when you have a office lunch. But wine is becoming more and more every day, and it's no longer just something that you would enjoy when it's like Mother's Day or 50th birth anniversary or something like that. Of course, there are a lot of people who still think that wine shouldn't be drank in front of children, for example. I'm very opposite. I think you should be able to enjoy wine responsibly and also teach that to your children. From the early age, that wine is something that can be enjoyed during meals, and it's not something that's just drunk on a Friday or Saturday night in quantity and not quality. So I think in general there is a premiumization trend in Finland as well. People are maybe drinking less, but they're drinking better. So they're really understanding the quality slowly. And the average bottle price is all the time increasing also in alcohol. Of course, a lot of that is got to do with tax increases that are hitting Finland as well. But also it does show that people care more and more about what they drink and not just, the alcoholic percentage or the effect that the wine has. So wine is becoming less and less an alcoholic beverage and more wine itself.
Like a part of culture, maybe, kind of, right?
Yes, and something that people are using a lot more. Restaurants, they want to eat out, they want to enjoy, and it's not, like I said, it's not just a special occasion anymore that people go to restaurants to eat and drink, but it can be also just on Tuesday night to go and visit a restaurant and see some friends and enjoy a glass or two amongst the meal.
And what kind of maybe lesser known regions would you or could you recommend for people in your industry? What are the kind of emerging countries or regions around the world or even just in Europe in terms of wine growing or wine production, do you see?
Well, I think that overall the islands are very interesting, whether we're talking about Santorini in Greece or like Tenerife in Spain. I really enjoy the wines coming from those regions. Also, the emergence of really those Central European, Eastern European wine countries. There's a lot of potential there. A lot of wine growers are now realizing which grape varieties are working the best in their vineyards, and they are now no longer trying to mimic an internationally recognized style wine, but they're actually concentrating on what's best for their vineyards. When it comes to Finland, I would like more Finnish people, and especially the trade, the professionals here, to understand that there is a lot of quality wine made outside Europe as well. So it feels sometimes to me that a lot of Finnish sommeliers only look into European wines, and they tend to think that it's somehow better. And if you ask why they think that, they often come up with the idea that it's more sustainable to drink European wines when you're in Europe. But it's not always the case, because sometimes wine from outside Europe, they are shipped with boats to Europe, whereas in Europe everything pretty much moves with trucks. So it's actually not that sustainable either for like carbon emissions and so forth to drink only European wine. And I would like to teach this country and the people here that there's a lot of great what we call New World producers, whether it's Southern California or cool climate areas of Australia like Adelaide Hills and some parts of Margaret River and so on. So there's a lot of great wine producing regions that we still haven't properly explored, and a lot of great producers making wines outside of Europe that in Finland we don't really recognize and know about yet. And there could be a lot of potential for those producers here. But overall, I think regardless of the wine country, I think producers are now looking into, they're taking seriously, they're considering seriously the climate change, and they're looking at, planting their vineyards now to north-facing areas in the northern hemisphere to get into cooler climates, to using rootstocks that are better adjusted to certain yields and so forth. So I think there are a lot of interesting and emerging wine regions, but also within the wine regions, they are learning that certain sites are doing better and better now, and maybe those wines and those regions that we tend to think are the best now might not be best anymore in 10, 20, 30 years time.
And what do you see Finnish consumers are looking for mostly in a wine?
Well, first of all, I think consumers should be at least subdivided into certain groups, because it's impossible to talk about just one consumer group as a whole. But there are, of course, people new to wine, people more established, younger people, maybe older people, more experienced people, more new people to wine. But in general, a lot of people in Finland, if I wanted to make generalizations, I'm trying to do, Riesling as a grape variety has become pretty much the synonym for white wine, and it's been like that for a couple of years now. And that's probably got to do with the style of cooking that's now trending in Finland, which is a lot about fermentation, pickling, using freshwater fish, a lot of vegetarian dishes, also the Asian food trend that goes quite well with Riesling. So Riesling is really popular here. Amongst red wines, people tend to look into wines that are quite big and full-bodied, with a lot of sweetness of fruit. So in that sense, a lot of warmer climate wines, mainly from New World, that tend to be more fruit-forward. Those are really enjoyed in Finland, but also wines from Italy, from Veneto, Ripassos, and so forth. They are really popular amongst, if you say, normal Finnish consumers. But there is also requests for more specialities, and also we have a retail monopoly, as I mentioned earlier. And in that monopoly, they do these trend reports every now and then. And over there as well, in the tenders, they try to reflect the current kind of wine climate or wine culture in the world, and they are bringing in specialities all the time. So I think there is a potential for more indigenous varieties and different regions as well, and it is a way also to educate the consumer, to provide these opportunities, and not just stick to the wines that they already know.
Mm. And you are also the president of the Finnish Sommelier Association, as I understand, right?
That's correct. I was elected, yeah.
And what are maybe your missions or goals as the president of this association, or how and in which direction, if you want to change, in which direction would you like to push the association or the Finnish wine world in the future?
So for the last couple of years, the previous president has done an amazing job in the association. We have established a good level of finances. We've established a good level of members. We are very active with our supporting members, and also we are very active in the International Sommelier Association (ASI), where our previous president, now the vice president, is taking actively part in their governance. I still want to make. I think I have a lot of work to do to get people, the professional people working in the industry in Finland, to really appreciate the association and to find it almost like their trade union, in a way that's the place where they can really motivate themselves, learn more about wine, come together, talk to people about wine, go into tastings and masterclasses that provide invaluable insights for them. So I want to make it really, really relevant for the people who actually work in the industry and restaurants, to be able to provide more knowledge, especially as wine education in Finland seems to struggle at the moment for a bit. So I really want to make it so that every professional would feel like they really want to be part of the association, and the association should be more than just supporting those sommeliers who want to compete, but also to support the whole industry in total, and pushing people forward and creating that wine culture in Finland even further.
And how do you see maybe your personal role in this kind of efforts? If I just may refer to your Twitter account, because I've taken a look, which I suggest to every listener actually, because I think it's very informative. And where do you see your personal role maybe in this kind of story as a master of wine? Maybe just to put out these kind of information on Twitter, and maybe direct your followers in certain areas of learning about regions and learning about wines?
Well, I must admit I'm not very good at social media, so I don't really have a social media strategy personally. So when I post something on Twitter, which I mainly use for professional stuff, it might just be like, you know, the wine I just had, or a pie I just created, or a place that I just visited. So I don't regard myself as an influencer as such. You know, there are a lot of like wine bloggers who are, probably have, you know, thousands and thousands of followers, and they actually make an influence to other people. I'm a very open person, so I also, even if I use Twitter for my professional stuff, I also put some, you know, my personal enjoyment there, from what I do in this industry, and when I eat and drink out, for example. I could probably provide more knowledge, and I do sometimes post some articles and new stuff that's happened in the wine world, or people who have, you know, unfortunately passed away, or, you know, new innovations and so forth. It's probably not the most educational Twitter handle that there is, but I am, you know, it's mine, so I think it looks like me, to be honest.
I also asked this question because maybe people who are not sommeliers or do not want to have this kind of expertise in wine, but they are just interested in and want to know about regions and want to be aligned with the new trends, so to say. I think maybe reading a decanter magazine, it would be too much for them to read this kind of long articles. But I think accounts like yours, this could be really a great path for a lot of people to follow really professionals, but have fun with it. Just to remember, this wine is a food, and have fun with it. You can learn about it, but you know, just find this kind of balance, and that's why I really like this Twitter account. I just wanted to know that. I will put the links below because maybe more people should do something like this. And another thing, what I wanted to ask about the Finnish, way of life or way of dealing with wine. There is a lot of conversation, or starting to be a lot of conversation about fruit wines. And
Yes.
Finland is also producing a lot of fruit wines. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so obviously traditionally we don't really make we don't really grow that many grapes, because it's a bit too cold, especially for, you know, making quality wine out of grapes here. But we have probably one of the world's best climate to create and grow berries. So berries are used also not just to, you know, different kind of, you know, eating on their own or making jams or juices out of them, but also to make berry liqueurs and berry wines. Traditionally, a lot of these berry wine producers have been using and adding a lot of, for example, water into their products, because the sugar acid balance has been you know, not correct when they've made those products. But we now have more and more knowledge to make those berry wines. And actually, at the moment, there is this lovely couple. I think she's from Southern America and he's from Northern America, and he used to work with wine grapes in Northern America, but they now live in Finland, and they have started a project with berry wines a couple of years ago, and have really been accomplished a lot of awards, also in international wine competitions. So the winery is called Ainoa Winery, and they're making some of the greatest berry wines I've ever tasted out of Finnish ingredients. So blueberries, cloudberries, lingonberries, all these kind of things that you might imagine. And because of the cool, long growing season of our summers, the berries really develop great aromatics but retain their freshness in a similar way, whereas as wine grapes do that in different parts of the world. I believe a lot of the best wines of the world come from grapes that are grown at the limitation of their ripening. So if we talk about Riesling or Pinot Noir, for example, from areas where they are just able to ripen, but have that long, cool growing period where all different flavors and aromatics can be developed with the freshness of the acidity still still held in place. And I think we have that for berries in Finland. And I think some of those wines can be really excellent. Of course, you should not compare them with grape wines. It's a completely different drink product to my liking, but they can be very, very good. Absolutely.
How should customers imagine the kind of taste what you get from a blueberry wine, maybe?
Well, it should taste like the berry, so it should really taste like blueberry. You should be able to taste that. Usually those wines are the best when they are made in sweeter styles. So you would have that element of sugar bringing weight to the palate and also balancing the relatively high acidity that those berries have. But it should be really like wine to me. It should be really about the purity of the fruit. And I think the most successful wines are really that. You can really taste the blueberry, and it's very intense taste of that blueberry in those wines. And then you have a good acid and sugar balance as well, even if they are often sweet styles.
And in terms of alcohol levels?
I think there are differences. I think some start with like 8%, but some go much higher, 13, 14. It depends. I mean, there are people who make dry berry wines as well, but I think the most successful ones are the ones that are sweeter, and they can be quite interesting combinations as well with different desserts or with different cheese as well. So in my previous life, when I worked in a restaurant that was a lot about Finnish products in general, we used some of those wines to accompany our desserts, and they really worked out well.
So how do you see the future maybe of these drinks, not only in Finland but maybe in the trade?
Well, I think it's interesting addition to the alcoholic beverage world that's pretty vast nowadays. And I think in terms of berry wines, I think countries like Finland and the Nordic countries in general, I think they have a very good stand on that because of the growing season here. It's never going to be as big as wine, but of course it's not made from grapes, so it shouldn't be even compared to that category, in my opinion, that much. But for sure, it's going to be something that's special to us, and a lot of people, when we again allowed to be traveling around the world, it's something that we could use as our product and be proud about it. This is what Finland can do. Hopefully, in my lifetime, we won't be able to produce good quality wine from grapes, because that would mean that the climate would need to, change a lot, and temperatures would be increasing a lot. But I think it's something that's a lot of tourists might be interested about. It's a new kind of product. Well, not new kind of product. For a lot of people, it's still something unusual, made out of Finnish ingredients, pure ingredients that are grown in our forests, and that's berries. So in that sense, it could become a kind of a national proud product that we could show tourists visiting our country.
And maybe just to go back to your studies a little bit, becoming a master of wine. How, if maybe young sommeliers or young people in the trade are listening to this conversation, what is your advice for these young people who want to take a leap and become not just the assistant sommelier in a restaurant, but then have this kind of desire of becoming more?
Well, of course, like I said earlier, you need to have the reason why you want to do that, and the reason should be to develop yourself and not for getting any accolades. I think you need to work hard, and you need to work for right reasons. If you are motivated and if you want to work hard, then be rigorous. I mean, studying never ends. For me, getting the MW is just it's just a milestone. I just still carry on and learn about wine almost every day and read. I have 5 books now that I'm reading, and 4 of them are about wine. So it's a never-ending path, and you can always learn more and more and develop yourself more and more. But if you want to get there, and I think everybody should follow their own path and not follow anybody else's path, because then they wouldn't be truthful to themselves. But if you want to follow something similar that I've done, then just, it's just motivating yourself to do it, and it's every day that counts. And it's, you need to have certain values, and you need to realize, okay, what is there something that I can skip, and where can I take the time to study more? For example, I don't have a television. I don't read yellow pages or yellow magazines or whatever you call this trash. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. But, I follow the news, but I don't follow. I don't know what's happening. I don't know anything about famous people out there, because I just don't follow. I've got no interest in following that kind of things. So it kind of depends what you want. I don't know the newest movies or the trending albums or stuff like that. I've spent my time reading about wine and learning that. So if that's the choice you want to do, then fair enough, do. But you should do it for right reasons. And if you want to be able to have a conversation about the latest TV shows, then you need to give up something else. So it just depends. You need to decide what you want and why do you want it, and then just really work hard to get that. But realize not getting that is not going to be the ultimate. It's about the journey. And for me, for example, the biggest gain of the whole MW thing has been the community that I found. All those people who have been giving me so much of their time and being supporting me all the way through my journey, and still are supporting me, have become my close friends. That's the most, that's the biggest thing I could have gained from what I've done so far, is those friendships and those connections that I've created with the people who care about wine as much as I do. And that's something that, money can't buy.
Perfect. Great story. That's I like this. And you also already mentioned 5 books. Can you maybe share us with what are you reading now?
So the books that I have I've started but I haven't finished. They are, actually one is not about wine. So 3 about wine. So I have the book called The Story of Champagne by Nicholas Faith. Then I have a wine terroir book open that's called Wine and Place. Then I'm still finishing Gerard Basset's Tasting Victory. And then the 2 non-wine related books are Charlie Trotter's Lessons in Excellence. And then I'm reading, nowadays I try to read something in Finnish as well, because I hardly ever read anything in Finnish. So now I'm reading actually a Finnish version of a silly book by Ben Elton, which is in English it's called Inconceivable. But it's just for reading something in Finnish and trying to be, relaxing a bit also in this Corona history that's going on around the world. So trying to read something silly as well.
And do you have maybe other favorite books in terms of wine?
In terms of wine, yeah, I have a few. So I know it's quite popularly mentioned as the one of the favorite wine books, but I also was quite impressed in my early stages of my career when I read Kermit Lynch's Adventures in the Wine Route. In my studies, when I was doing the diploma, I really enjoyed reading David Bird. So David Bird's Understanding Wine Technology. And it was a very touching moment for me to meet David Bird and his lovely wife at the graduation party last November. And I also like reading Jamie Good. So Jamie's done a good book with Sam Harrop called Authentic Wine that I really enjoyed. And then in terms of if you're really into studies and you want to study about viticulture, I love Stephen Skelton's book called Viticulture. But it depends if you want to have recommendations to learn or recommendations on, more kind of philosophical wine books. And also sometimes, you want to read about wine and culture. And for that, I really like, publications like The Noble Rot, where they combine food and wine and music and just general, atmosphere and lifestyle. So it depends what you look into.
And just maybe one last question. What do you think maybe the biggest misconceptions are in the wine world in terms of, for example, now I'm reading a book from Maltman, Vineyards, Rocks and Soils, because I was really interested in the term of minerality and where does it come from, because I come from the Lake Balaton in Hungary, and on the northern side, the soil and the primary rock is actually more basalt. So these producers tend to use these descriptor minerality a lot. Do you have any like specific misconceptions what you are looking into these days, or what sometimes maybe bothers you in tastings or in the wine world, what you hear?
Well, I think the biggest misconception amongst consumers is that you should know about wine to be able to enjoy it. Like if you compare wine to, for example, music, how many of us who enjoy music actually understand how the music has been composed? It's okay not to know, but still enjoy. And I see it more and more, especially now that I'm doing a lot of work with consumers and the retail channel. It's okay not to understand everything, but it doesn't mean that you still can't open that bottle of wine, enjoy it, and share it with your friends, and also comment on it. It's fine. Wine is a mystery, and it's mystery for many of us. How that certain grape or certain vine, and with those bunches of grapes that they produce, how can that liquid that's been done from those taste as it tastes like? There's always something mystical about wine, and that's fine. So I think that's the biggest misconception I nowadays face, is that, I hear it so often. People say, oh, I don't understand much, or I might be wrong, but is this okay? Is this okay? And if you find certain things in wine, if you enjoy it, that's the main thing, and not about understanding exact the detail and the chemistry and everything that's happened behind. If you are a wine professional, for sure, that's been my driving force. I am curious. I want to understand it all, and I still don't, because I'm really bad in chemistry, and that's why I don't really understand the whole winemaking process in a detailed level. But it's okay. It doesn't restrict me from enjoying wine, and I think consumers should do the same.
That's beautiful advice from a master of wine. Perfect last word. Thank you very much, Heidi, for your time. And I wish you all the best in these great times, and I hope your business will thrive.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Mate, to be involved with your podcast. This was a fun experience. So thanks very much for everybody who listened to this.
Thank you.